14 personal assistants walked out of the Ashworth estate in less than 6 months. Most were reduced to tears within 48 hours by a paralyzed CEO whose icy fury was matched only by her ruthless intellect. Headhunters stopped taking the contract, branding the position across corporate Manhattan as a career graveyard. Nobody expected a desperate single father with zero executive experience and a 6-year-old daughter asleep in his rusted sedan to survive past the first morning. The iron gates of the Ashworth estate did not open with a welcoming slide. They ground apart like the jaws of a fortress, revealing a half-mile driveway shrouded in heavy Westchester fog. Eric Sullivan gripped the steering wheel of his 12-year-old Ford sedan, his knuckles white beneath the dashboard's flickering amber light. In the back seat, wrapped in a faded fleece blanket, 6-year-old Mia breathed softly, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Eric checked his watch. 6:42 a.m. He had 18 minutes before the most intimidating interview of his life and exactly $84 left in his checking account. "Stay hidden, Ladybug," Eric whispered into the rearview mirror, even though Mia was sound asleep. He had cracked the rear windows an inch for fresh air and parked the sedan behind a manicured hedge near the service entrance, out of direct view of the security cameras. It was a massive breach of professional protocol, but Eric had run out of options 3 weeks ago when his logistics management job vanished in a corporate acquisition. Eviction notices didn't care about severance freezes. Inside the grand foyer, the air smelled of floor wax, fresh orchids, and underlying tension. House manager Martha Caldwell, a woman in her late 50s with posture so rigid it looked painful, inspected Eric's worn suit jacket and scuffed dress shoes with undisguised skepticism. "You don't have an Ivy League degree, Mr. Sullivan," Martha said, her voice echoing off the imported Italian marble. She flipped through his single-page resume with a sharp flick of her wrist. "You spent 7 years managing regional supply chains for a freight firm. You have no formal background in executive administration, let alone assisting a high-net-worth individual with complex medical dependencies." "I manage chaos, Miss Caldwell," Eric replied quietly, holding her gaze without blinking. "Supply chains are about anticipating bottlenecks before they happen, managing difficult personalities under tight deadlines, and keeping operations running when everything breaks down. That sounds like an executive assistant's job description to me." Martha sighed, rubbing her temples as if fighting a chronic migraine. "The salary is $4,000 a week, paid every Friday by direct deposit. Comprehensive health care starts on day 1. Eric's heart hammered against his ribs. $4,000 a week meant saving his apartment. It meant Mia's asthma medication wouldn't require rationing. There is a reason the compensation is nearly triple the market average," Martha continued, her tone dropping to a grim warning. "Victoria Ashworth built Ashworth Financial into a $30 billion empire by age 32. 18 months ago, a truck ran a red light on FDR Drive, severed her spine at the T6 vertebrae. She is paralyzed from the chest down, confined to a motorized chair, and she has not forgiven the universe for it." Martha stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "She has fired 14 assistants since January. She broke a Yale graduate in 4 hours by forcing him to read quarterly loss projections aloud until he vomited from stress. She wants to prove she doesn't need anyone, yet she requires assistance for nearly every operational aspect of her day. If you show pity, you are gone. If you show weakness, she will eviscerate you. Do you understand?" "Take me up," Eric said simply. The master suite on the 3rd floor felt less like a bedroom and more like a high-tech corporate bunker. Banked screens illuminated the darkened space with glowing financial charts and international market tickers. At the center of the room sat Victoria Ashworth. She was strikingly sharp-featured, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot that accentuated her pale, angular face. She sat in a custom titanium wheelchair surrounded by digital tablets and legal dossiers. She didn't look up when Martha opened the door. "I said iced green tea at 65 degrees, not 60, Martha," Victoria spoke, her voice a precision instrument engineered to cut through steel. "If the kitchen staff can't read a basic thermometer, terminate them." "Ms. Ashworth, the 7 a.m. applicant is here," Martha said, stepping aside before swiftly closing the door behind her. leaving Eric alone in the lion's den. Victoria finally turned her chair around with the hum of a silent electric motor. Her piercing gray eyes swept over Eric, analyzing him like a flawed spreadsheet. She let the silence stretch for 30 agonizing seconds, a classic power move designed to make candidates nervous enough to start babbling. Eric didn't say a word. He stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, waiting. A tiny, almost imperceptible line appeared between Victoria's eyebrows. She reached over to a stack of 300 printed legal filings on her side table and deliberately shoved them onto the hardwood floor. Papers scattered across the room in a chaotic cascade of white sheets. "My previous assistant dropped those before she left yesterday crying," Victoria said coldly. "They are the evidentiary exhibits for my 9 a.m. briefing with our Zurich legal counsel. They need to be collated chronologically, indexed by exhibit code, and cross-referenced with the digital ledger on that tablet. You have 45 minutes while I dictate correspondence. Begin." It was a trap. Any standard assistant would drop to their knees immediately, frantically scrambling to gather the papers while missing the dictation entirely. Eric calmly walked over to the desk, picked up a spare legal pad and a pen, and pulled up a high-backed leather chair, sitting down directly across from her. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Did you suffer a cognitive failure, Mr. Sullivan? I told you to collate the floor." "No, Miss Ashworth," Eric said in a steady, measured baritone. "If I crawl around on the floor organizing physical papers while you dictate high-speed correspondence, I will mishear your dictation, which creates legal liability for a $30 billion firm. I am going to record and transcribe your dictation first with 100% accuracy. Then, I will use my logistics sorting method to collate those documents in 15 minutes. Speak whenever you're ready." Victoria stared at him, her gray eyes widening slightly in genuine shock. No one had told her no in 18 months without shrinking back in terror. For a second, a thunderstorm brewed on her face. Then, her lips curled into a cold, dangerous smirk. "Letter to the Federal Reserve Oversight Committee," Victoria began, her words rattling off like machine gun fire at twice normal speaking speed. "To whom it may concern, regarding the proposed liquidity stress test adjustments for Tier 1 asset structures." Eric wrote with brutal efficiency, using a personalized shorthand he had perfected during years of chaotic warehouse manifest disputes. For 40 minutes, Victoria threw complex financial jargon, multi-clause legal threats, and obscure European banking regulations at him, trying to snap his focus. Eric didn't flinch once. At 7:41 a.m., she stopped abruptly. "Read back paragraph 4, the section on derivatives hedging." Eric looked at his pad and read it back verbatim, including the exact statistical percentages she had cited. Silence fell over the room. Victoria eyed the mess on the floor. "You have 19 minutes left for the exhibits. Impress me, logistics man." Eric knelt, but instead of picking up paper by paper, he rapidly divided the floor into 4 spatial quadrants, sorting the sheets by the colored barcodes printed at the bottom margins, a trick he used when organizing shipping container manifests. His hands moved in a fluid, relentless blur. By 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the deadline, 3 neat, perfectly bound folders sat on her desk beside the digital tablet. Victoria picked up the top folder, checking the dates. Perfect. "Don't get comfortable, Mr. Sullivan," she said, turning her chair back toward the glowing market monitors. "Most people survive Monday. Let's see if you're still standing by Wednesday." By Tuesday afternoon, Eric realized Victoria Ashworth's rage wasn't just personality, it was armor. She was fighting a two-front war, one against her own failing physical autonomy, and another against the predators circling her company. While pushing Eric through an exhausted 14-hour shift of document reviews and intense physical transfer assists, helping Martha safely shift Victoria from her daytime chair to her specialized physical therapy apparatus, Eric kept his ears open. He noticed a recurring name on the internal private line, Derek Langston. Langston was Ashworth Financial's chief operating officer, a polished corporate veteran who had been running day-to-day operations at the Manhattan headquarters since Victoria's accident. On the surface, Langston sounded charming, deferential, and deeply concerned for Victoria's health. But Eric's years in logistics had given him a sixth sense for systemic discrepancies. At 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, while Eric was sitting at his designated desk in the outer executive study, he reviewed the schedule Langston's office had synced to Victoria's personal calendar. Something felt off. Eric pulled up the physical therapy logs sent by Dr. Alistair Finch, Victoria's private neurologist. Dr. Finch had explicitly scheduled a mandatory 2-hour autonomic nervous system recovery session for Thursday at 1 p.m. Yet on the synchronized corporate calendar, Langston's assistant had booked a high-stress, mandatory emergency video conference with the board's auditing committee at that exact same time. It wasn't an isolated mistake. Eric pulled 3 months of historical calendars from the server logs. Every time Dr. Finch scheduled a critical physical rehabilitation therapy session or a pain management consultation, Langston's office quietly slipped an urgent, high-stakes financial briefing into the exact same slot 24 hours prior. When Victoria inevitably skipped her medical therapies to attend the meetings, her chronic neuropathic pain spiked, leading to visible fatigue and short-tempered outbursts during the calls. They're baiting her, Eric realized, a chill creeping up his neck. Langston is intentionally engineering physical exhaustion to make her look mentally erratic in front of the board. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Martha stood in the doorway, holding a tray of untouched broth. Her face was lined with deep exhaustion. She refused to eat again. Martha quietly sighed, setting the tray down. She thinks the kitchen is putting sedatives in her food because she felt drowsy during the London call yesterday. Eric turned the monitor toward Martha. Martha, take a look at this. The kitchen isn't sedating her. Her pain management patches last 12 hours. When she misses her 1 p.m. physical stretch sessions because Langston books these emergency board calls, her nerve compression acts up. She takes an extra breakthrough pain pill just to get through the meetings. That's what's causing the drowsiness. Martha leaned over the desk, her eyes scanning the data trails Eric had highlighted. Her breath hitched. My God, if Derek Langston can prove to the board of directors that Victoria is medically incompetent and emotionally unstable, the bylaws allow a vote of no confidence. He becomes acting CEO and triggers a mandatory buyout of her founder's shares at half value. How close is he to getting that vote? Eric asked. Very close, Martha whispered grimly. There is a quarterly performance assessment this Friday. If she falters during that presentation, Langston has the votes lined up to strip her of operational control. Eric looked toward the heavy oak doors of Victoria's quarters. Behind all that vicious sarcasm and demands for absolute perfection was a woman terrified of losing the only thing she had left in the world. The company she built from nothing. Martha, Eric said gently, shifting the topic to his own precarious reality. Is Mia still asleep in the staff suite? Martha softened slightly, nodding. She went out like a light around 8. I sneaked her some warm milk and toast. Eric, you are playing a terrifying game here. If Victoria finds out you smuggled your daughter into the East Wing guest quarters because you lost your apartment, she won't just fire you. She will blacklist you across every industry in New York. She despises unauthorized personnel on the grounds. I know, Eric murmured, rubbing his face. He had taken his first paycheck advance on Monday evening to secure a clean, safe 2-bedroom apartment in White Plains, but the lease didn't finalize until Saturday morning. Until then, the Ashworth estate was the only roof over Mia's head. Just give me until Friday night. Once I get through this board meeting and secure my first full week's pay, we'll be out of the staff quarters. Just keep her invisible, Eric, Martha warned. Victoria's hearing is sharper than a hawk's. Thursday morning arrived with a torrential downpour that rattled the reinforced glass of the Ashworth estate. The tension inside the master study was suffocating. At 8:30 a.m., just 90 minutes before a preliminary strategy session with international investors, Victoria was reviewing her digital briefing files when the screen flashed an error message. Corrupted file. Asset valuation index missing. Victoria slammed her palm against her titanium armrest. Eric, where is the secondary valuation ledger from the Munich real estate holdings? Eric hurried over, running diagnostic commands on her terminal. The file path was deleted from the central server at 3 a.m., Ms. Ashworth. Someone purged the directory remotely from the Manhattan IT portal. Langston, Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic that she couldn't hide. He knows the Zurich Group won't commit without verified asset valuations. If I show up to this briefing empty-handed, it confirms his narrative that I'm losing oversight of our core portfolios. She looked away, her knuckles white as she gripped her chair. He's going to win. He's actually going to take my company. Eric looked at the digital clock. 8:30 6:34 a.m. Manhattan was an hour and a half away in heavy rain. A physical backup server existed at the corporate disaster recovery vault, but couriers wouldn't drive through the flash flood warnings. "Miss Ashworth," Eric said firmly, grabbing his coat, "where is the nearest physical backup drive stored locally?" "There is a encrypted hard drive at our secure data vault in downtown White Plains," Victoria said, looking at him helplessly. "But the vault manager requires double-blind biometric release protocols, and their courier service suspended operations due to the storm. You can't get it here in time. I used to route emergency freight through Category 2 hurricanes for medical supply lines," Eric said, his eyes burning with intense determination. "Call the vault manager right now and authorize my name for release. Keep the board talking when the call starts. I'll be back." Eric didn't wait for her reply. He sprinted down the stairs, bursting into the pouring rain. His old Ford sedan roared to life, tires spinning on the wet gravel as he launched down the driveway. For 50 minutes, Eric drove like a man possessed, hydroplaning across flooded intersection routes, taking obscure industrial side streets he had memorized during his logistics career to bypass gridlocked highway traffic. He burst into the White Plains data center soaked to the bone, grabbed the encrypted drive from a stunned facility officer, and raced back through the storm. At 9:47 a.m., 17 minutes into Victoria's stalled meeting, the oak doors of the study flew open. Eric dripped rainwater onto the imported rugs as he strode directly to her terminal, plugging the drive into the master interface. Within 4 seconds, the Munich valuation data populated the screen in crisp, glowing columns. Victoria didn't miss a beat. Without turning around to look at him, her voice instantly shifted from a defensive stall into a commanding, lethal strike. "As you can see on your screens now, gentlemen," Victoria projected smoothly into the camera array, staring directly at the video square, where Derek Langston sat looking visibly stunned. "Our Munich commercial assets have appreciated by 11.4% year over year, significantly outperforming the conservative estimates presented earlier by our chief operating officer. Perhaps Mr. Langston should update his local software before advising the board on asset yield." For the next 20 minutes, Victoria dismantled Langston's financial arguments with surgical precision. When the call disconnected, the room plunged into profound silence. Victoria slumped back in her chair, closing her eyes. The sheer physical toll of the adrenaline rush was obvious. Her breathing was shallow, and her fingers twitched from exhaustion. "You ruined a $30,000 Persian rug with your wet shoes, Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, her eyes still closed. "I'll deduct it from my salary over the next 40 years, Ms. Ashworth," Eric replied, wiping rainwater from his forehead with a sleeve. A faint, uncharacteristic smile flickered across Victoria's face for a fraction of a second. "You did well today, Eric. Very well." Before Eric could acknowledge the compliment, a sound echoed from the heavy mahogany door leading toward the East Wing hallway. Creak. Eric's stomach dropped through the floorboards. Standing in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit and wearing oversized cotton pajamas, was 6-year-old Mia. She rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking confusedly around the massive, intimidating office room. "Daddy?" Mia mumbled softly. "The thunder was really loud in the little room. I got scared." The temperature in the executive study seemed to plummet 40 degrees in an instant. Victoria's motorized chair spun around with a sharp mechanical hum. Her gray eyes locked onto the little girl standing barefoot on the hardwood floor. The faint warmth that had lingered on her face just moments before vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, freezing disbelief. "Eric," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that felt sharper than any blade she had wielded all week. "Who is that child? And why is she in my house?" The silence that followed Mia's voice was heavier than the thunderstorm rattling the leaded glass windows of the study. Eric slowly closed the distance between the desk and the doorway, positioning his body as a physical shield between his 6-year-old daughter and the freezing scrutiny of Victoria Ashworth. He knelt, scooping Mia into his arms. Her small head dropped immediately onto his shoulder, her fingers twisting into the damp fabric of his suit jacket. "I asked a question, Mr. Sullivan," Victoria said. Her titanium wheelchair glided forward an inch, the electric hum slicing through the room's tension. "Martha!" she called out toward the intercom panel, her voice ringing with autocratic sharpness. "Get in here immediately." Within 10 seconds, Martha appeared at the side door, her face draining of color the moment she saw Mia clinging to Eric's neck. "Explain this breach of residential security," Victoria commanded, Her gray eyes locked entirely on Eric. Did you think, because you salvaged a file from a data center, that my private home is a boarding house for unauthorized dependents? Martha had nothing to do with bringing her onto the grounds, Ms. Ashworth. Eric lied smoothly, his voice flat and even without a trace of trembling. I brought her in through the service garage at 6:30 Monday morning. My previous employer went under during an acquisition freeze, and the medical bills for her pediatric asthma cleared out my savings account. Our landlord locked us out on Friday afternoon. My new lease in White Plains doesn't clear until Saturday morning. Eric stood tall, holding his daughter securely against his chest. I needed 48 hours of secure indoor shelter, so my daughter wouldn't sleep in a rusted sedan during flash flood warnings. I took a calculated risk that my logistical output would outweigh my breach of protocol. If I miscalculated, I will pack our bags and leave the grounds within 15 minutes. But do not reprimand Martha. She discovered us last night and gave me a toast because she has a conscience. Victoria stared at him. The muscles along her jawline flexed beneath her pale skin. In her world of corporate Manhattan mergers and ruthless venture capital, people constantly lied, deflected, or groveled when caught in a violation. They blamed subordinates. They wept for sympathy. Eric did none of those things. He stated his liabilities, owned the breach, and laid out his operational metrics like a man presenting a quarterly balance sheet. Before Victoria could issue a termination order, Mia lifted her head from Eric's shoulder. She rubbed her eyes, blinking against the harsh LED displays of the financial terminals, before her gaze drifted down to Victoria's specialized wheelchair. "Your chair has big wheels," Mia mumbled, her sleepy voice piping up in the cavernous room. "Like the forklifts at Daddy's old warehouse. Do they have regenerative braking?" Victoria blinked, caught completely off guard. "What?" "Regenerative braking," Mia repeated innocently, pointing a small finger toward the custom drive hubs on the titanium frame. "Daddy said the big electric trucks save power when they go down steep ramps because the wheels push electricity back into the battery. Does your chair do that when you go down the hallway?" For 5 seconds, Victoria Ashworth looked less like a $30 billion CEO and more like someone who had just been handed a puzzle written in an alien language. She looked at the child, then up at Eric, who looked equally resigned to his fate. "She listens to my technical training podcasts in the car," Eric murmured quietly. "I apologize, Ms. Ashworth. I'll get out of your hair." He turned toward the door, his hand reaching for the brass knob. "Stop!" Victoria commanded. Eric paused, his hand hovering over the handle. Victoria wheeled herself slowly toward the desk, picking up the printed Munich real estate asset valuation report Eric had risked his life to retrieve an hour earlier. She stared at the crisp columns of data that had just humiliated Derek Langston in front of 3 international banking syndicates. "Your daughter is correct," Victoria said coldly, not looking up from the paper. "The custom mobility rig utilizes dual-stage brushless motors with kinetic energy recovery systems designed by a robotics firm in Palo Alto. It extends battery duration by 22% during continuous transit." She tossed the report back onto the mahogany desk and looked directly into Eric's eyes. "Derek Langston has spent the last 6 months hiring private investigators, bribing household staff, and manipulating medical schedules to prove to my board of directors that I am a broken, erratic invalid incapable of managing this corporation," Victoria said, her voice dropping into a register of chilling clarity. "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the full board convenes at our headquarters on Wall Street for my mandatory 18-month governance assessment. It is the first time I will physically enter that building since my spine was severed on FDR Drive." She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on her armrests. "If I show up tomorrow looking exhausted, disorganized, or physically dependent on a medical handler who doesn't understand high-stakes corporate warfare, Langston triggers Section 14 of our corporate charter. He initiates a vote of medical incapacity, seizes control of the board, and forces a liquidation of my equity." Victoria gestured toward the East Wing corridor. "Your daughter stays in the guest suite on the 2nd floor until Saturday morning. Martha will supervise her meals and ensure she has stable Wi-Fi for her schooling modules. But in exchange, Mr. Sullivan, you are going to act as my absolute operational shield for the next 24 hours. You will coordinate every millimeter of my transit to Manhattan. You will secure the boardroom layout, and you will ensure that when I face Derek Langston tomorrow morning, I look like the most lethal CEO in North America." Her gray eyes hardened into obsidian. "If you fail me tomorrow, or if one detail of my physical dependency leaks to Langston's internal allies, I will not just terminate your employment. I will use Ashworth Financial's legal division to garnish your wages across every supply chain firm on the eastern seaboard for breach of confidentiality. Do we have a deal?" Eric looked at his daughter, whose eyelids were drooping once again, then back at the paralyzed billionaire who was betting her entire empire on a desperate freight manager from Queens. "We have a deal," Eric said. By 2 p.m. on Thursday, the Ashworth estate had transformed into a military command post. While Martha settled Mia into the sunlit second-floor guest quarters with a stack of coloring books and fresh hot cocoa, Eric immersed himself entirely in the brutal, complex reality of Victoria Ashworth's medical and physical logistics. He sat beside Dr. Alistair Flinch, Victoria's chief neurological consultant, who had arrived via private car, reviewing the strict physiological tolerances of a T6 complete spinal cord injury. "People think paralysis just means you can't walk, Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Finch said quietly, as they reviewed Victoria's vital charts on the study's secondary monitors. "They don't understand the systemic fragility beneath the surface. Because Victoria's injury is at the 6th thoracic vertebrae, her brain has no communication with her lower nervous system. Her blood pressure cannot self-regulate efficiently. If she experiences extreme stress, dehydration, or a minor physical trigger, like a bladder obstruction or a pinched nerve from sitting improperly, she is at high risk for autonomic dysreflexia. Define the operational impact," Eric said, his pen moving rapidly across his legal pad as he built a structured timeline for Friday morning. "Her blood pressure spikes to lethal levels within minutes," Dr. Finch explained grimly. "She will experience blinding headaches, facial flushing, severe sweating above the injury line, and cognitive disorientation. If not mitigated immediately by adjusting her seating angle and administering sublingual nifedipine, it can cause an intracranial hemorrhage or stroke on the spot." Eric stared at the data. "Langston knows this." "Of course he knows it," Victoria voiced from the far side of the room, where she was reviewing the audit dossiers on her primary tablet. "Why do you think his executive assistant specifically requested the south-facing boardroom on the 50th floor for tomorrow's assessment? The south boardroom has floor-to-ceiling glass windows with faulty climate controls. By 10 in the morning, the greenhouse effect raises the ambient temperature in that room to 82 degrees. Heat triggers vascular dilation and physical exhaustion. He is designing a physical endurance test designed to make me collapse on camera." Eric didn't waste time complaining about corporate ethics. His supply chain brain immediately categorized the threat as an environmental variable requiring mitigation engineering. "First," Eric said, walking up to the central whiteboard, "we eliminate the temperature bottleneck. At 4 o'clock this morning, I'm sending a private HVAC repair technician from my old freight facility in Queens directly to the 50th floor under the guise of an emergency server room cooling audit. He will override the thermostat sensors in the south boardroom and lock the ambient airflow at exactly 64 degrees Fahrenheit." Victoria watched him, a glimmer of sharp approval flickering in her eyes. "Go on." "Second, transit logistics," Eric continued, drawing a detailed route map across the whiteboard. "The standard transport van contracted by the estate uses hydraulic wheelchair lifts that take 4 minutes to deploy and operate on a standardized frequency key. I pulled the security maintenance logs from the estate garage. Over the past 3 weeks, an outside contractor named Greg Jenkins, who ostensibly handles your fleet maintenance, has accessed the primary transport van 6 times outside of standard inspection windows." Dr. Finch frowned. "Jenkins? He was recommended by Langston's head of corporate security." "Exactly," Eric said flatly. "At 4 a.m. tomorrow, before the household wakes up, I am conducting a complete forensic mechanical inspection of that primary transport vehicle. If Jenkins compromised the lift hydraulics or battery arrays to delay our arrival or cause a transit failure on FDR Drive, we need an immediate redundancy plan." For the rest of the evening, Eric worked with relentless mechanical precision. He memorized Victoria's exact transfer mechanics, learning how to properly brace her knees and support her core stability during transitions without triggering nerve spasms. He packed a discreet, high-durability tactical attaché case containing her emergency sublingual blood pressure medications, digital glucose monitors, backup catheterization supplies, and 3 spare lithium-ion power cells for her motorized chair. At 11:30 p.m., Eric finally stepped out of the master suite to check on his daughter. He found Mia fast asleep in the plush guest bed, her small frame dwarfed by the down comforter. Martha sat in a reading chair nearby, silently folding laundry under the soft glow of a table lamp. "She ate an entire plate of chicken roast," Martha whispered warmly, looking at the sleeping child. "She told me you used to build castles out of empty wooden pallets at the distribution center on weekends." "She remembers the good parts," Eric said quietly, leaning against the doorframe, every muscle in his back aching from tension. "Martha, tomorrow is going to get ugly. Langston isn't just trying to win a proxy vote. He's trying to destroy a woman's dignity in front of 50 corporate peers to justify a takeover." "Then don't let him," Martha said simply, her older eyes fierce. 14 assistants walked out of here because they looked at Victoria and saw a tyrant. You looked at her and saw a person surrounded by wolves. Guard her, Eric. At 3:45 a.m. on Friday morning, long before dawn broke over Westchester, Eric walked down the concrete stairs into the estate's underground climate-controlled garage. He carried a high-powered LED flashlight and a digital multimeter. He bypassed the luxury sedans and went directly to the custom Mercedes-Benz Sprinter van, outfitted with Victoria's hydraulic wheelchair deployment lift. He knelt at the rear bumper, sliding underneath the undercarriage to inspect the primary electrical harnesses feeding the hydraulic pump mechanism. He popped the protective weather shield housing. Eric's jaw clenched. The primary ground wire leading to the lift's hydraulic solenoid had been sliced through with a diagonal wire cutter, leaving only 2 thin copper strands intact. It was a classic mechanical sabotage technique used by corrupt freight dispatchers. The lift would work once during morning testing under zero load, but the moment the heavy 300-pound titanium wheelchair and Victoria's body weight were applied during actual loading, the remaining copper strands would snap from electrical draw. The lift would freeze 6 feet in the air, trapping her outside the vehicle in freezing morning temperatures, while triggering a cascade of system error codes that would take hours to override. Eric pulled out his phone and took high-resolution timestamps and macro photos of the severed wire, capturing the fresh, unoxidized cut marks. He didn't repair the wire. Repairing it would alert Jenkins or Langston spotters that the sabotage had been discovered. Instead, Eric walked to the far bay of the garage, where his 12-year-old Ford sedan sat alongside a heavy-duty commercial cargo van he had quietly requisitioned overnight through his old logistics network. A rugged, reliable vehicle borrowed from a trusted former freight colleague in Yonkers, equipped with a mechanical manual lock ramp that required zero electricity to deploy. Eric checked his watch. 4:15 a.m. The chessboard was set. At 7:15 a.m., Victoria Ashworth sat at the edge of her bed, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray Armani executive suit that masked the specialized posture braces strapped beneath her jacket. Her hair was styled with immaculate precision. Yet, as Eric entered the room carrying her morning briefing files, he noticed her fingers trembling slightly where they gripped the armrests of her chair. "The primary transport lift is dead," Eric said calmly, setting the attaché case onto her desk. "Someone sliced the solenoid ground wire. It was designed to fail halfway up the loading cycle." Victoria's breath hitched slightly, her pale face tightening. "Langston wants me trapped in the driveway while the board convenes at 9. He wants to open the meeting by announcing that his wheelchair-bound CEO couldn't even manage her own morning commute. Let him announce whatever he wants," Eric replied smoothly, walking behind her chair and disengaging the charging tether. "We aren't taking the Mercedes. I brought in a commercial heavy-duty transit van with a reinforced manual spring assist ramp parked at the service dock. It isn't leather-lined, Ms. Ashworth, but it doesn't rely on software or solenoids, and it gets us to Wall Street 30 minutes ahead of schedule." Victoria tilted her head back slightly to look at him, her gray eyes searching his face for any sign of hesitation or panic. She found none, just the calm, unshakable focus of a man who spent his life moving critical freight through impossible bottlenecks. "Let's move," she said. The drive into Manhattan was a study in precision driving. While morning rush hour traffic choked the FDR Drive, Eric utilized commercial truck bypass routes through the South Bronx and across the Harlem River bridges, navigating the heavy cargo van with fluid, assertive maneuvers. In the back, secured securely to the floor tracks, Victoria reviewed the digital slides for her presentation, her initial tremor completely vanishing as Eric's steady narrative of traffic updates and strategic timings grounded her focus. At 8:18 a.m., 42 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin, the unmarked commercial van pulled into the subterranean private loading dock of the Ashworth Financial Tower on Wall Street. Two corporate security guards, wearing uniforms paid for by Ashworth Financial but loyal to Derek Langston's administrative regime, stepped forward immediately, holding up their hands to block the loading bay. "Unauthorized commercial vehicle," the lead guard said loudly, stepping toward the driver's window. "Clear the dock immediately. This area is reserved for executive transport." Eric stepped out of the cab, dressed in his crisp, newly dry-cleaned navy suit, his posture radiating authority. He walked directly to the rear doors of the van and pulled them open, dropping the heavy steel manual ramp with a solid, echoing clang against the concrete dock. "I am Eric Sullivan, Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer," Eric stated clearly, his voice bouncing off the concrete pillars as Victoria Ashworth's custom titanium chair glided smoothly down the ramp into the fluorescent lights of the garage. "You are currently obstructing the path of the majority shareholder of this corporation 45 minutes prior to a mandatory board assessment. Step aside immediately, or I will have legal counsel pull your security vendor contract before noon." The guards froze, their eyes widening in shock as Victoria Ashworth, whom they had been explicitly told by Jenkins would be delayed in Westchester until at least 10 o'clock, fixed them with a look that could cut diamond. They scrambled backward, swiping their access cards to open the private executive express elevator. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing them inside the glass and steel vertical shaft rising 50 stories above Wall Street, Victoria let out a long, slow breath. She looked at the polished steel reflection of the elevator walls, seeing her paralyzed frame seated at waist level, while Eric stood tall beside her, his hand resting casually near the handle of the tactical attaché case containing her medical contingencies. "For 18 months, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the elevator hoist, "I have dreaded coming back to this building. I built every floor of this tower, Eric. And today, half the people in that room are waiting to see if I'm going to break." Eric looked down at her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or corporate cheerleading. "In logistics, Miss Ashworth, a structure doesn't collapse because the payload is heavy," Eric said quietly. "It collapses because the weight is distributed unevenly. Today, you carry the strategic vision. I carry the operational weight. Nobody breaks." The elevator chimed, "Floor 50, executive boardrooms." The heavy double-glass doors opened onto the expansive executive reception atrium. The ambient air was crisp and cool, exactly 64 degrees, thanks to the early morning intervention of Eric's Queen's HVAC contact. Through the glass partitions of the South Boardroom, 12 senior board members, 3 international banking syndicates on massive video arrays, and Chief Operating Officer Derek Langston were already assembled around the 60-foot mahogany conference table. Langston stood at the head of the table, sipping an espresso, looking supremely relaxed and confident as he checked his gold wristwatch. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the official start time, Langston tapped his microphone, projecting his voice across the room and over the live video feeds. "Gentlemen," Langston said with practiced, sorrowful gravity, "it is now 8:45. As we anticipated, our esteemed founder, Ms. Ashworth, has encountered severe logistical and medical complications at her estate this morning and is unable to join our governance assessment. Given the urgent regulatory filings required by the Securities and Exchange Commission this afternoon, I propose we initiate formal proceedings to address operational succession under Corporate Charter Section 14. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open with a resounding thud. The room fell dead silent. Victoria Ashworth glided into the boardroom, the silent electric motors of her titanium rig moving at full, commanding speed. Flanking her right side, keeping perfect pace with her chair, was Eric Sullivan, carrying 3 thick leather-bound evidentiary dossiers under his arm. Victoria didn't stop until her chair reached the absolute head of the table, forcing Langston to physically step backward out of her way to avoid being clipped by her footrests. She locked the titanium brakes of her chair with a sharp, audible click. "Good morning, gentlemen," Victoria said smoothly, her voice clear, resonant, and completely devoid of fatigue as it carried across the 60-foot room. "I apologize for interrupting your opening remarks, Derek, but it appears your calendar notifications are running as unreliably as your asset valuation reports." She turned slightly toward Eric, extending her hand. Without a word, Eric laid the first dossier directly onto the polished mahogany in front of her, then smoothly distributed duplicates to the lead audit director sitting at the center of the table. Langston's face went pale, his eyes darting frantically toward the glass doors as if expecting his security staff to appear and explain how she had bypassed every logistical trap he had laid. Before we review our third quarter growth projections, Victoria continued, looking directly into the camera array broadcasting to the European banking partners. My executive assistant, Mr. Sullivan, will present a comprehensive forensic audit of internal communications and fleet maintenance logs over the past 90 days. It details an extensive, systematic attempt by our chief operating officer to artificially manipulate executive scheduling and sabotage corporate transit vehicles. The boardroom erupted into a low, stunned murmur of voices. Langston gripped the back of his leather chair, his knuckles turning white as his gaze locked onto Eric with absolute venom. "This is an absurdity!" Langston shouted over the rising noise, his polished corporate veneer cracking completely. "This man is an unvetted freight dispatcher she hired 4 days ago. He has no security clearance to present financial or administrative audits to this board." Eric stood at the edge of the table, unbuttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calmness. He looked directly at Langston, then down at the time-stamped macro photographs of the severed solenoid wire he had placed at the center of the boardroom table. "My clearance is signed by the majority shareholder of this corporation, Mr. Langston," Eric said in a clear, resonant voice that silenced the entire table. "And unlike your transport vehicles, my data doesn't break down under pressure." Just as the lead board director reached for the forensic dossiers to inspect the photographs, Victoria suddenly gripped the right armrest of her chair with blinding force. Eric saw it instantly. A violent, involuntary tremor shooting up her right arm, accompanied by a rapid, unnatural flush spreading across her neck and throat. The extreme physiological stress of the entrance, combined with the delayed shock of the morning's adrenaline, had triggered the exact neurological crisis Dr. Flinch had warned them about. Her blood pressure was skyrocketing. She had less than 2 minutes before the autonomic dysreflexia caused a catastrophic physical collapse right in front of the 50 cameras capturing her every breath. The flush spreading across Victoria Ashworth's throat was not a blush of anger. It was the dark mottled crimson of severe vascular dilation. Beneath the tailored fabric of her Armani blazer, her heart hammered against her ribs at 140 beats per minute. A stabbing, catastrophic headache, a sensation like a serrated iron spike being driven directly behind her eyes, pushed her vision to the edge of a tunneling gray blackout. In a T6 complete spinal injury, when the autonomic nervous system encounters an unmitigated stressor, whether physical compression, extreme sensory overload, or raw adrenaline, the severed neural pathways below the injury level spasm into a massive, uncontrolled sympathetic reflex. Blood vessels constrict violently below the chest, sending systolic arterial pressure skyrocketing toward 220 millimeters of mercury. Above the injury line, the brain desperately attempts to lower the pressure by dilating blood vessels, resulting in profuse diaphoresis, facial flushing, and impending stroke. Langston saw the sudden tremor in her right hand. He saw the sheen of sweat suddenly catching the boardroom spotlights on her forehead. A cruel, triumphant gleam flashed in his dark eyes. "Look at her!" Langston projected his voice across the room, pointing a polished finger directly at Victoria's trembling frame. "She is in acute cognitive and physical distress right now. Her medical condition is destabilizing in the middle of an official board briefing. Chairman Crawford, under corporate charter bylaws, I demand an immediate recess and the invocation of emergency medical transfer protocols." 2 executive board members halfway down the table stood up, their faces etched with genuine alarm. On the 60-foot video arrays, the senior partners of the Zurich and London banking syndicates leaned forward in their leather chairs, watching the feed with intense, predatory calculation. If Victoria lost consciousness or had to be wheeled out of that room by paramedics, Langston's narrative would become absolute truth. Ashworth Financial stock would plunge 12% within 10 minutes of the market opening, and the board would vote her out by lunchtime to stabilize share prices. Eric Sullivan did not look at the board members. He did not look at Langston. He moved with the frightening mechanical efficiency of a man who had spent 7 years coordinating hazardous material containment protocols under ticking countdowns. With one hand, Eric smoothly popped the dual latch seal of the tactical attaché case, resting on the corner of the mahogany table. With his other hand, he reached beneath the right armrest of Victoria's custom titanium chair, locating the manual pneumatic tilt-in-space release lever. "Mr. Sullivan, step away from the chief executive officer!" Langston shouted, striding toward the head of the table. "Security! Remove this man immediately!" "Shut up and sit down, Langston," Eric said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, seismic baritone that carried such absolute, dangerous authority that Langston froze mid-stride 3 feet away. Without breaking eye contact with the surrounding room, Eric squeezed the release lever and smoothly tilted the entire seating matrix of Victoria's chair backward by 15 degrees, while elevating her lower leg rests by 2 inches. The precise shift in postural geometry immediately relieved the gravitational pooling of blood and reduced the mechanical compression on her lower spine, the primary physical trigger aggravating her sympathetic nervous system. Simultaneously, Eric retrieved a small sealed foil blister pack from the attaché case. He popped the seal with his thumb, extracting a 10-milligram sublingual nifedipine capsule, a rapid-acting calcium channel blocker prescribed by Dr. Flinch specifically for hypertensive emergencies. To the 50 cameras and 12 board members watching, Eric appeared to simply lean down to whisper a confidential strategic figure into his CEO's ear while adjusting her lapel microphone. Under the cover of his broad shoulders blocking the primary camera angle, he pressed the capsule between Victoria's pale, trembling fingers. "Under the tongue," Eric murmured softly into her ear, his hand resting reassuringly against the back of her titanium headrest to stabilize her posture. "Bite the capsule once to release the liquid, then let it sit. Breathe with my cadence, Ms. Ashworth. In for 4 seconds, out for 6. The tilt is locking your core pressure. You have control." Victoria's eyes were glassy with intense pain, but her razor-sharp intellect fought through the fog. She slipped the capsule beneath her tongue, her jaw flexing slightly as she punctured the gel coating. Within 30 seconds, the potent vasodilator entered her sublingual mucosa, rushing directly into her bloodstream to counter the violent arterial spasms. "Chairman Crawford," Langston insisted, his voice rising in panic as he realized the dramatic medical collapse he was banking on was not occurring. "I insist on a formal recess. This man is administering unverified substances to the CEO during a governance vote." At the center of the 60-foot table, Jonathan Crawford, a 72-year-old former federal judge who served as senior chairman of the audit committee, raised a single hand. The entire room fell quiet. Crawford looked over the rims of his reading glasses, his shrewd, weathered gaze bypassing Langston completely to settle on Victoria Ashworth. "Miss Ashworth," Chairman Crawford said in a dry, measured tone, "do you require medical intervention, or are we ready to proceed with the third-quarter financial reconciliation?" Victoria closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Eric's hand remained steady against her chair frame, anchoring her to reality. She felt the chemical warmth of the nifedipine widening her constricted blood vessels. The pounding iron spike behind her eyes began to dissolve into a dull ache. Her heart rate dropped from 140 down to a controlled 92. She opened her eyes. The flush on her throat had faded back to her natural, intimidating ivory porcelain. She engaged the motor controls, leveling her chair back to an upright, commanding posture. "Medical intervention won't be necessary, Chairman Crawford," Victoria spoke, her voice ringing out across the boardroom with crisp, acoustic perfection, chilling Langston to the bone. "My executive assistant was merely adjusting my audio telemetry and providing my prescribed morning electrolyte supplement. Now, if Mr. Langston is quite finished performing amateur theatrics, I suggest we examine the forensic dossiers Mr. Sullivan placed in front of you." Jonathan Crawford opened the leather-bound dossier sitting at his station. Around the table, 11 other senior directors followed suit, the rustle of heavy bond paper echoing through the 64-degree room. "What you are looking at, gentlemen," Victoria stated, her hands folded neatly on her lap, "is an independent cross-referencing audit conducted over the past 72 hours by Mr. Sullivan, utilizing supply chain verification methodologies." Eric stepped toward the central interactive display monitor at the side of the room. He tapped his tablet, projecting a complex, color-coded relational database onto the 70-inch wall screen. "For the past 6 months," Eric explained, his voice professional and steady, "Ashworth Financial's internal logistics and fleet maintenance budgets have experienced an unexplained 17% cost inflation. Mr. Langston attributed this to rising regional supply chain tariffs and specialized vendor contracts for executive transport." Eric highlighted a cluster of financial routing nodes on the screen. "That was a lie. By auditing the serial numbers and parts invoices submitted by our external fleet contractor, Greg Jenkins, we discovered that Ashworth Financial was being billed for heavy-duty commercial hydraulic replacement units that were never installed on any corporate vehicle. Langston's face shifted from pale to an ashen, sickly gray. "This is fabricated data! You hacked the corporate intranet!" "I didn't need to hack anything, Mr. Langston," Eric replied smoothly. "In freight logistics, every serialized hydraulic pump carries a manufacturer origin barcode. I cross-referenced the barcode invoices approved by your office with the physical inventory of our garage fleet. The parts billed to Ashworth Financial were actually shipped to a commercial warehouse in Long Island." Eric tapped the screen again. A corporate registry document appeared, bearing the seal of the Delaware Secretary of State. That warehouse is owned by a shell company called Apex Transit Solutions, LLC. Eric continued relentlessly. And according to the state and corporation records filed 18 months ago, 2 weeks after Ms. Ashworth's accident on FDR Drive, the primary beneficial owner of Apex Transit Solutions is Derek Langston. A collective gasp rippled around the table. Chairman Crawford's head snapped up, his jaw tightening into a grim line as he stared at the COO. Over the past 18 months, Mr. Langston has embezzled approximately $2.4 million through fraudulent maintenance contracts, Victoria said, taking over the room with devastating precision. Furthermore, when Mr. Sullivan inspected my primary transit van at 4 o'clock this morning, he documented deliberate mechanical sabotage to the hydraulic lift systems, specifically designed to trap me off-site during this assessment. She looked directly at Langston, her gray eyes burning like dry ice. "You cut the solenoid ground wire, Derek. You endangered my physical safety to manufacture a medical absence." "You can't prove that," Langston snarled, backing toward the glass exit doors, his professional composure completely shattered. "Jenkins had access to that garage. Any mechanic could have cut that wire." "Which is precisely why I instructed Mr. Sullivan to leave the wire exactly as he found it," Victoria said calmly. "And why, at 8 o'clock this morning while we were en route via commercial van, my private legal counsel submitted the time-stamped photographs directly to the New York District Attorney's Office alongside the wire fraud documentation. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the boardroom opened once more. 3 men in dark suits, 2 special agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force accompanied by Ashworth Financial's head of corporate security, stepped into the room. "Derek Langston," the lead federal agent asked, holding up a federal arrest warrant signed by a Southern District judge less than an hour prior. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and reckless endangerment. Step away from the table, sir." Langston froze. He looked around the boardroom, desperately seeking a single friendly eye among the board members he had spent months lobbying. Every director turned their gaze away, looking down at their dossiers in cold, professional repudiation. Without another word, the federal agents cuffed Langston's hands behind his back and escorted him out of the boardroom, the glass doors sliding shut behind them with a definitive air-sealed click. For several long seconds, the boardroom remained completely silent, save for the hum of the video conferencing hardware broadcasting to Europe. Chairman Crawford slowly closed his dossier. He removed his reading glasses, placing them neatly on the mahogany table, and looked at Victoria Ashworth. "Ms. Ashworth," Crawford said, his voice laced with profound respect. "On behalf of the Audit Committee and the full Board of Directors, I move to formally dismiss the medical incapacity assessment. Furthermore, we reaffirm your absolute operational authority as Chief Executive Officer of Ashworth Financial, effective immediately." Around the table, every single board member raised their right hand in unanimous consent. Victoria bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you, gentlemen. Our Q3 revenue report indicates a 9% expansion in our European tech portfolios. Let us proceed with the agenda. For the next 2 hours, Victoria ran the board meeting with absolute dominance. And standing 6 feet behind her right shoulder, silent, vigilant, and completely unshakable, stood Eric Sullivan. Saturday morning in Westchester County dawned crisp and bright, the heavy rain clouds from the previous days giving way to clear, golden autumn sunlight that illuminated the sprawling lawns of the Ashworth estate. Near the service garage, the trunk of Eric's 12-year-old Ford sedan was popped open. Eric stood in his jeans and a faded flannel shirt, hoisting a taped cardboard box containing Mia's clothes and books into the rear storage compartment. His first weekly paycheck, a direct deposit of $4,000 minus taxes, had cleared into his account at midnight. His new 2-bedroom apartment lease in White Plains was officially active as of 8 a.m. He had survived the week. He had saved his daughter from homelessness. He had executed his contract. "Daddy, did you pack my green markers?" Mia asked, skipping out of the side kitchen entrance, holding a half-eaten blueberry muffin Martha had baked specifically for her departure. "Right on top of your coloring books, Ladybug." Eric smiled, wiping a smudge of flour from her nose. "Go say goodbye and thank you to Martha. We hit the road in 10 minutes. As Mia ran back inside toward the kitchen, Eric shut the trunk with a metallic clatter. He turned around to find Martha standing on the stone pathway, and beside her, gliding silently over the custom slate paving stones, was Victoria Ashworth. She was dressed casually for the first time since Eric had met her, wearing dark cashmere loungewear and a cream-colored knit sweater. A soft wool blanket draped over her lap. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, softening the severe, angular contours of her face. "Leaving without filing a departure manifest, Mr. Sullivan?" Victoria asked, halting her titanium rig 3 feet away from the sedan bumper. "My contract was for 48 hours of crisis management, Ms. Ashworth," Eric replied respectfully, wiping off his dusty hands on his jeans. "The board is secured. Langston is sitting in a federal holding cell in Manhattan. Your new interim COO is arriving Monday morning. I got my paycheck advance cleared, and my apartment is ready. You don't need a supply chain manager sleeping in your East Wing anymore." Victoria looked at the rusted fender of the old Ford, then back up at Eric. "You are a terrible liar, Eric," she said quietly. "You managed 65 complex logistics hubs across 7 states for 7 years before corporate restructuring eliminated your division. You don't belong in a regional freight office managing shipping crates." She reached into the pocket of her cashmere sweater and pulled out a crisp, heavy linen envelope, extending it toward him. "What is this?" Eric asked, hesitating before taking it. "Read it," she commanded softly. Eric opened the envelope and unfolded the 2-page contract inside. His eyes scanned the bold headings. "Ashworth Financial Corporation. Executive Employment Agreement Position. Vice President of Global Operations and Chief of Staff to the CEO base compensation. $380,000 per annum, plus full executive equity vesting options and comprehensive medical coverage." Eric stopped reading. He looked up, his breath catching slightly in his chest. "Ms. Ashworth, this is a C-suite executive tier. I don't have an MBA. I have 12 Harvard MBAs in my analytics department, and none of them noticed that my chief operating officer was embezzling millions through brake repairs," Victoria said, her gray eyes remarkably warm. "I don't need another credentialed sycophant telling me what I want to hear. I need someone who understands operational reality under extreme pressure. I need someone who doesn't flinch when the room catches fire." Before Eric could formulate an answer, the kitchen door swung open again. Mia trotted out, carrying her stuffed rabbit under one arm and a large folded sheet of drawing paper in the other. She walked straight up to Victoria's wheelchair, completely unafraid of the paralyzed billionaire. "I made you a schematic," Mia announced proudly, holding out the paper. Victoria blinked, caught completely off guard by the child's solemn presentation. She leaned forward slightly, taking the drawing. It was done in green and blue crayon. It depicted a large, smiling stick figure, seated in a wheelchair, with massive, heavily detailed wheels, labeled with arrows, saying, "Super Fast Battery." Next to the chair stood a tall stick figure, holding a briefcase labeled Daddy, and a smaller stick figure holding a rabbit. Above them all was drawn a giant reinforced fortress with sun rays beaming down. "It shows your regenerative braking hubs," Mia explained, pointing a chubby finger at the wheels. "And I added rocket boosters on the back so you can go up the steep ramps faster than the bad guys." For the first time in 18 months, since the tragic afternoon on FDR Drive that shattered her spine and turned her world into a freezing battlefield, Victoria Ashworth laughed. It wasn't a cold, sarcastic smirk. It was a genuine, melodic laugh that bubbled up from deep within her chest, bringing a natural warmth and brightness to her face that rendered her stunningly beautiful. "Rocket boosters," Victoria smiled, looking down at the drawing with genuine reverence before looking at Mia. "That is a brilliant structural enhancement, Mia. I will have my engineering team review the feasibility on Monday." Victoria carefully folded the drawing and tucked it safely inside her sweater pocket. She looked up at Eric, her professional armor completely stripped away, revealing the deeply loyal woman beneath. Clause 4 of your employment contract stipulates residency requirements, Eric, Victoria said gently. The East Wing guest quarters on this estate consist of 3 bedrooms, a private kitchen, and an attached solarium. It is currently empty. The local elementary school in Westchester is rated top 3 in the state, and their pediatric asthma support clinic is 10 minutes down the road. She gestured toward the estate grounds. Martha already ordered 2 sets of custom bedroom furniture for the 2nd floor. Don't make me return them to the logistics vendor, Mr. Sullivan. I hate processing restocking fees. Eric looked at the document in his hands, then at his daughter, who was currently inspecting the LED display on Victoria's chair control panel with intense, fascinated curiosity. He swallowed hard, feeling the profound weight of the past 6 months of fear, poverty, and desperation finally lifting from his shoulders. In logistics, Ms. Ashworth, Eric said, his voice husky with emotion as he smiled down at her. We never reject to optimize supply route. Good, Victoria said, turning her chair toward the main house with a soft hum of titanium wheels. Then unpack your car, Chief of Staff. We have a $30 billion empire to run on Monday morning, and Mia needs to help me redesign my brake calipers. As the single father and his daughter walked alongside the paralyzed CEO down the sunlit driveway of the Ashworth estate, 14 assistants belonged firmly to the past. The career graveyard had finally met the one man who knew how to build a fortress out of the storm. What an incredible journey of resilience, loyalty, and redemption. Eric and Victoria proved that true strength isn't about physical perfection or corporate titles. It's about standing firm when the rest of the world expects you to fall. If this dramatic real-life story of a devoted single dad transforming the life of a ruthless, paralyzed CEO touched your heart, please smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this inspiring narrative with your friends and family, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss another thrilling, emotionally powerful story. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite plot twist, and we will see you in the next video.